Bold and raw perspectives of local politics. Important information which impacts our community, nation, and world. Exposing truth, transparency, and getting to the heart of relevant issues that you just won't see in the clickbait media. And always keeping it real. It's the Michelle Tanner Podcast.
But I won't back down.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Michelle Tanner Podcast. Super excited for today's episode because we're getting to take a little break from the typical politics. We talk a lot on this show, but also, in the intro you just heard there, discussing truth, transparency, getting to the heart of relevant issues. And I really can't think of much more of a relevant thing that so many people, if there's one thing we can count on in this life, it's experiencing grief in one form or another. And so we'll get into that with today's guest. I want to introduce you here to in just a second. First, I want to give a quick shout out to the St. George Sunrise Farmers Market. Don't forget, they are there every Saturday at Segmiller Park from 10 to 2. And actually, I wanted to make sure y'all knew about it, especially this week, because this Saturday, as we all know, we have big Black Friday, of course, Thanksgiving, but we have Small Business Saturday. This Saturday, the St. George Sunrise Farmers Market is going all out for this to help our local business owners, entrepreneurs. Santa is going to be making an appearance every Saturday from, I think, between 11 to 1. So make sure, but you can be there anytime 10 to 2 at Segmiller Farm Park. Definitely check them out. Okay, so I first got introduced to our guests today. Actually, my parents live up in Washington State in the summertime, and my mom called me one day and she said, I just met the most amazing couple. You have to have them on your podcast. So I'm really happy that it worked out that you guys could actually be here in studio. So I have with me Becky and Tim Graff. Welcome to the Michelle Tanner Podcast.
Thanks for having us, Michelle.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I'm so glad that we could make this work, especially in person. I want to actually pull up here a book that you've written called, what's the name of your book?
Swept Away, a true story of grief and acceptance.
Yes, and I want to just kind of read actually what it says here on the book because I think it's a pretty good segue to get into your story. So, Mother's Day weekend felt enchanted and seemingly perfect until suddenly and without warning, it instantly turned tragic. In a flash, thick darkness replaced bright sunshine. The sky opened furiously, unleashing torrential rain and hail in what some call the storm of a century. The downpour triggered a flash flood that swept away and shattered the life of the Graff family once knew. What came after is a heartbreakingly beautiful journey of grief and acceptance. Becky courageously shares her powerful story of the first year after a loss. It is an open and deeply personal look into the turmoil and triumph that comes from attempting to rebuild a life torn apart. And I just, I read that and I remember actually being aware of your story when it happened back in 2020 when you lost within seconds the life that you knew, both of your children. So I would love if you're open to it. And I think it's first so awesome that you are so open about your story because I think sometimes people kind of try to tiptoe around, when people go through such a tragic event. And I think it's really important and empowering that you're able to just speak so freely about that. So thank you, first and foremost, for being willing to talk so openly. But take me back, 2020, leading up to Mother's Day. What was your life like at that beginning of 2020? What was a life in the Graff household?
Busy.
Very busy.
It was busy, but honestly, it was probably the happiest and most fulfilling time of our life. Everything was kind of crazy. We were, restrictions about where you could go and what you could do because of what was going on in the world.
Right.
But for us, like the bonds were just getting closer. We spent a lot more time together, a lot more time outside. Girls' activities were kind of curtailed a little bit, so we had to get creative on how to navigate that in the home. But it sounds cliche, but it was the perfect young family environment, right? Crazy kids.
Yeah, it was kind of nice because, to be honest with you, we've always been outdoors people. Like, we love to get out. We're from Salt Lake City, Utah. So within, just a couple hours, we've got the mountains, we've got the desert. Like, there's so much area here in Utah to explore. And we love to get out in the outdoors. And so one of the things that we always were doing on the weekends was going out and enjoying nature. And so our girls grew up loving it. And with the events of 2020 and with what was going on with the world and everybody's social distancing, one of the nice things is it just gave us more ammunition to get out in nature and go be where nobody else was. So that's what we were doing.
And were you working remotely at that time, or were you having to go in like day to day to normal 9-to-5 jobs, or were you able to, at that point, you were with your girls quite a bit?
I was working remotely and had been for several years prior to that event. Tim was working at the time.
Yeah, at the time I was still working, going into a 9-to-5 and doing the grind. So, yeah, when I wasn't at work, we got out as much as we possibly could.
What do you both do for a living?
So I'm a digital marketer and author, as you mentioned. I wrote a book, and I work with entrepreneurs and coach them on how to build their brand and their businesses. A lot of inner work is primarily where I spend most of my time. And then you want to go for it. And then we actually transitioned not too long ago after this experience with our girls. And we help other people who are navigating grief, who are stuck in grief, get through that and find lasting and sustaining healing, utilizing specialized skill sets.
That's so awesome. And so your girls, tell me their names. How old were they?
So McKinsley, was our oldest, and she was 7 when she passed. She would be 12 today. And then Alexia was 3 when she passed, and she would be 8 today.
Oh, beautiful. I've seen some of the pictures. Beautiful, beautiful girls. So it's Mother's Day weekend, 2020, and you guys are out enjoying the beautiful outdoors, as it sounds like you guys did so often as a family together. If you're comfortable with it, kind of walk through what happened that day.
Yeah, so one of the things that we did for Mother's Day is down in southern Utah, down by a little town called Hanksville, there's Goblin Valley State Park, and there's actually right there by Goblin Valley, there's a little slot canyon called Little Wild Horse. And we, as a family, Becky's family actually grew up going down there many, many times. She grew up hiking that canyon and camping in the area. And so it was a tradition that we just kind of carried on. Our girls grew up, hiking the canyon. They loved it. And so Mother's Day weekend, it was our family's opportunity to go down and spend some time in the area. And it was a tradition to hike the canyon. We went down there Mother's Day weekend. We got down there on Friday, and we started exploring the area. We had our side-by-side, and, we spent quite a bit of time running around out there on the side-by-side exploring. And then before we go home, when the weekend was done, usually we take the opportunity to go hike the slot canyon. The girls loved their Vibram-soled shoes, and they called them their sticky shoes. And they liked climbing up on the rocks and posing and, taking pictures and climbing up as high as they could on the sidewalls and, all this stuff and it just became a fun event for them to see how high they could climb and take pictures and pose and all those kinds of things. So before we were headed home, the girls wanted to go hike the canyon, of course. One of the things that we ran into on the way down that weekend was we had some issues with our trailer. We had actually we had a leaf spring that had broke, and we had a couple other complications with a truck that was towing it. And so I kind of looked at Becky and I says, honestly, we need to get the car fixed before we can be able to go back. And so what we finally decided after the girls just begging and begging and begging, like, come on, Mom and Dad, we got to go, hike the canyon. We always hike the canyon. It's so much fun. Was like, okay, how can we make this work? Because we've got to fix the car. We're on a time limit to get back home because I had to be home for my job. And I finally looked at Becky and I just said, well, I'll tell you what if I go into Hanksville, the local town, and get what I need to prepare, and then you and the girls go start hiking the canyon. And then it's, only 16 miles away. So it's like, I'll just come back and I'll join you up the canyon because I know how much the girls love playing on the walls and stuff. I knew they'd be taking their time and posing and having fun. So we separated. I dropped the girls off, Becky and our 2 daughters at the trailhead, and they started hiking up, and I headed into town for the repairs.
Yeah. And it was interesting because when he dropped us off, I remember it was hot, right? So you triple check all the things, make sure you got the sunscreen, got the water, got the backpack. And, I actually stopped before we went too far to triple check to make sure I had it because it was super, super hot outside. And if you've ever been in a slot canyon before, it starts out in a wide wash, and then as you continue forward, it narrows and the walls get really high. And so we were going and hiking, and as Tim mentioned, he knew our girls well. They were like, look, Mom, look at this. And they'd, do the ta-da-da pose or whatever and take a picture. And, kept on going. They're having a great time. And it's a place that we'd been more than once. As Tim mentioned, I grew up going there. We took my nieces and my nephews. It's not the first time we've ever been here. And, there's certain things that you do when you're in that area, which you check the weather, make sure that there's nothing within 100 miles, all those kinds of precautions so that you can have an educated guess of, how things are going to go. And that day there was less than a 10% chance of rain. Historically, that meant you would probably not even see any, clouds at all. And there wasn't any in sight when we went into the canyon. As we were going and having a good time, the girls were having a lot of fun. All of a sudden I heard something that sounded like a gunshot. And I kind of stopped, and my brother-in-law was actually with me. And I looked at him and I'm like, that was weird. And you look above, because we're far enough in the canyon now that you can't see much sky other than what's right above you. And there's still nothing but blue sky. You do the pause and you kind of check in with your intuition. It's not the first time we've done this. Is there, feelings or anything that indicate that I need to move, change, or could it have been a gunshot? I didn't feel anything, so we continued forward. It wasn't too much further before I heard it again. And then there started to be droplets of water. And so I'm like, well, okay, I need to assess where we're at. Is it going to be faster and safer to go up or go back the way that we had come? So I had my girls wait with their uncle while I ran ahead. And it was only a couple steps forward before I had the feeling run. It just slammed into my chest. I turned around, scooped up my little Ellie in my arm and told Kinsley to run. And we started running for all that we were worth. The rain had turned into hail, and so there was water falling off the slick rock, filling up the bottom like a bathtub, as well as hail pelting us in the section where we were running. And everywhere I was looking for a way for us to climb up and out. But when you're near a slot canyon, sheer walls make it really challenging to find an exit point. So that's what we were doing. It got to the point where Kinsley got a little bit further ahead of me because the weight of the water and in the water, the level of the water, coming up from the bottom was actually making it very challenging. I had to ditch my backpack. We had to turn sideways. Trying to run in those kinds of conditions was very challenging. She got a little bit ahead of me, and when I came upon her, she had her arms folded, and she was saying a prayer to her Father in heaven, saying, please help us out of this. In that moment, it was as if things just kind of stopped. There was so much mist because of the contrast between the hot that had been there and all of a sudden the snow or hail and cold water. It seemed kind of otherworldly. And it was at that point that I assessed where we're at, and I found a little nook to our right. I'm like, I think I can get her up there. Kinsley, what we're going to do is I'm going to brace myself, and I'm going to push you up there, and then I'm going to hand you your sister. And I'm going to wedge myself below you guys, and hopefully we can wait this out. I don't know how long it's going to be. So that was the plan. I had just barely gotten into position, facing down canyon to grab Kinsley by the wrist to help her over and push her up when the first wave hit and swept her out in front of me. The last thing that I saw of Kinsley was her hand outreach saying, "Mommy." And then it was hit with the second one, and Ellie and I were tumbled at that point. And then with any storm, any flash flood, the power of water does what it does, and I surfaced without both my girls. There is nothing more powerless than being at the mercy of that kind of onslaught. With every fiber of your being as a mom wanting to protect your children and being incapable of doing so. When I finally surfaced and came to rest, I was buried in sediment, and I was looking down at another narrow section, and I knew that I needed to get out, and I honestly didn't think that I would be able to. But the only thing that was driving me at that point is I need to get my girls. I need to find my girls. So with the help of unseen hands, I was able to get to the side and waited there until the waters receded and help came. And while I was dealing with that...
Yeah, so when I first noticed that, things were not okay, I had gone into town. I had made the necessary stops that I needed to. And as I was turning back towards, leaving Hanksville, headed back towards the Little Goblin Valley, the area out there, I noticed the storm system moving in over. And I knew immediately when I saw that moving over that Slot Canyon section that was bad news. And so I floored it and was headed back there as fast as I could on these little windy roads that go in there. And I must have been in and off the road multiple times trying to get in there. And at one point, the hail, when I got closer to the canyon, the hail came down and hit the window so much that it blanketed the window to where I couldn't see out. So I rolled down the driver's side window and had stuck my head out and was driving, with my head out the window trying to get back there. When I got to the trailhead, there was water just rushing down the wash that you go into to go up Little Wild Horse Canyon. And I knew my family was up there. I knew it was a bad situation. And so I was going upriver. You get over to the wash and you kind of wade down into the water, and it was hitting me by up to my waist. So I was staying close to the bank because the water was rushing so hard. I didn't want to get swept myself. And so I was kind of holding onto the bank and working myself upriver when I noticed, looking ahead, that I suddenly saw what looked like McKinley coming towards me.
Wow.
At first, I was, that denial kicks in. It's like, no way, this is not happening. And at second glance, I realized that it was. It was McKinley. And she was floating, tumbling, if you will, towards me in the water. I managed to work myself out to the middle and to grab a hold of her, took her to the side, put her up on the bank, and started doing CPR. I was probably there for 5-10 minutes doing CPR, what it felt like an eternity. But once I realized that she needed more than what I was doing, I threw up over my shoulder, ran back to the parking lot, screamed for help, and I was able to have some of the folks there in the parking lot help me get her down to the Goblin Valley Ranger Station, where first responders took over. They were able to call 911, get first responders there, and they took over working on McKinley, took over the CPR measures and working on her. I immediately, at that point, turned my focus back towards the canyon because I knew Becky and Alexia were still up there.
And was your brother-in-law down in there too, or
He was
gone?
with us that weekend.
Okay.
My brother was with us that weekend, and he was up the canyon with the girls as well. And
but not there, I guess, at the time that the waves came.
He had gotten separated from the
Okay.
girls. They had turned and started running. We also had my little dog with us up the canyon, and the dog had taken off up canyon, and my brother went after the dog, so they got separated
Gotcha.
at that point.
Okay.
So as I made my way back to the canyon after McKinley was at the ranger station, I was able to go up river, doing the same thing that I did before. I was able to wade up the river, and then I met Becky coming down with some help, and I realized that Ellie wasn't with her. At that point, I remember asking her, "Where's the baby?" She said, "I don't know." I knew she was okay. I mean, she was pretty rough, but she was alive.
Yeah.
And my focus immediately turned to Ellie.
Yeah.
I continued up Canyon, and that's when I actually ran into my brother coming down with the dog, and I knew that Ellie wasn't with him either. So turning my focus down, because I knew at that point, like, she wasn't up above where they were, I started walking. And honestly, I walked into that evening around 10, 11 o'clock before first responders finally came out and pulled me out of the canyon because it wasn't safe. And they mentioned to me when they got there that the comment, they didn't know. The last I saw of McKinsley when I left her with first responders at the Goblin Valley Ranger Station was they told me that they had the defib hooked up to her and they were getting a faint heartbeat and they had called for life flight. And so I had hope. I was hopeful that she was, going to pull through. When they came up and met me at 10 o'clock that night when I was still looking for Ellie, the first thing out of the sheriff's mouth was, we can't have another fatality. And I knew, like, with the force of 1,000 bricks hitting your chest, I just knew that the kids didn't make it.
Wow.
So Ellie, ultimately we came back the next morning with search and rescue. Ellie was found at about 11 o'clock that next morning. She was 28 miles downriver when they found her. But honestly, it was an absolute miracle that she was even found. There was so much debris, so much sediment. And as you can imagine, the force of that kind of water going through a pressure, a slot canyon like that's just pressurized. And it was amazing that, honestly, we even found her.
Yeah. I mean, it's so hard to even fathom. I mean, going through such a traumatic experience, and obviously the whole world that you knew completely shifted in that moment. How did you cope with that? Like, what was the process of coming to terms with this new reality?
I would say that there's a lot of accepting, and the word's very easy. Like, we throw the word, just accept. But really just naming and labeling what is real, what is actually the truth about the situation. What role do I have? Did I have? What do I have control over? And, cycling through those kinds of things, when you're dealing with something like that, your mind does not want to believe the truth. It's the last thing that it wants to believe, is that this is possible, that this happened, that things have to change, that you can't go back. We joked many times about time machines in the beginning, like, man, if we had a time machine and we did this, if we could just do it over again, what about that? But the reality of it is even if we were to change something, there's no guarantee that something else might not have happened to, cause their early death. Like, we don't have that crystal ball. We don't have the ability to see that. So there's a lot of that going on, internal work, in multiple areas. So the accident, the loss of the girls, our North Star, when you become a parent, like, that's the focus. You're a parent, you have these children that you want to raise, and you want them to have the best of the best and the best opportunities to become to their full potential. And that's exactly what we were doing. Everything that we did was for them and for that opportunity.
Yeah.
And so being faced with the reality that is no longer possible, our world was stripped down bare.
Yep.
My reason for getting up in the morning, gone.
Yeah.
The reason for a lot of things, gone. And so we had to be very intentional with how we looked at things and what perspective we chose, because it was very easy to slide into the despair side,
Right.
as you can imagine.
Yeah. And I mean, grief is such an encompassing thing that you being able to essentially use that grief and channel it in such a positive way. How does one do that? It's like so hard to even, I mean, I've not been through a fraction of the grief that you all have gone through. And even me with my own minute grief, it's like so difficult sometimes to move forward or channel that in such a positive way. What would be, I mean, I'm sure multiple aspects to this, but what are some things that you feel like really contributed to your abilities to being able to channel your grief in such a positive direction?
So, one of the interesting things, and we look back now, and I mean, it was a blessing in disguise that we didn't realize at the time, but we had gone through and gotten specialized in a coaching modality that is designed for it's behavioral research. It's backed by behavioral research from the provinces up in Canada. And we were introduced when we started our entrepreneurial journey to a gentleman named Blair Dunkley. He's based out of Canada, and he has created what he calls mind models. Mind models are, as I mentioned, they're behavioral modalities. They're a way to think. It's not just what to think about, but actually how to think. It's because everything is backed by behavior. You really can't make change in your life if you don't actually do the behavior, if you don't actually put forth effort. You can think it all day long, but until you actually do something, physically do something, it's not going to change. And action actually leads to beliefs, and and everything comes from actually behaving. Well, the year before the accident, we had gone through and been certified as a mind model method coach through Blair Dunkley's program. And we met him through, just entrepreneurs. It's one of the great things about an entrepreneurial journey is you meet some amazing people. And we didn't realize at the time, honestly, we had learned this skill set for business, and how to, as Becky mentioned, she does marketing, and it was a way to be more effective in business.
The joke is like the most expensive piece of real estate is the 6 inches between your ears, right?
Yep.
Right.
And it is very true. Like the stories we tell ourselves or that we allow to run rampant can either fuel us or they can keep us stuck. And so what Tim's talking about with the mind models, it was how to. And how to can be, really shaped in any area. So go ahead and finish. I cut him off.
You guys are a great team. I love it.
But yeah, so we had, and with these skill sets, we had just learned, it's interesting how basic the skill sets really are. But when you get down to it, it is the root cause of how we behave. It's actually down to language patterns as well. You can literally take and listen to the way somebody structures their words in a sentence and the words that they use, and you can basically tell a lot about how they think, how they behave, and it really can tell you quite a bit about that person just listening to the words that they come out of their mouth.
And this is like listening to how you talk to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So, how are we able to take something so encompassing as grief and really mold it into what we have now? Took a lot of intentional work, lots of intentional work. But it's very simple, like Tim's talking about. Like one of the things is, we ask the question, like, what can you control? And the general answer is, well, we can only control myself. But you would be surprised how often you attempt to behave as if you have control over other things, other people, other situations. Like somehow you have this magic wand that allows you to exert your will, what you wanted to see happen, onto that thing or with that person. And so one of the core things for us was, in addition to understanding that, what do you actually have control over? It was very powerful in that I don't have control over the weather. I don't have control over what happened. I could have, should have, would have myself to death. What if I did this differently? And maybe it would have, had some other outcome. But does that even matter at this point? Because can I change the past? I can only make change now. So what do I want to do with this?
And that's one of the other big skill sets that we focus a lot on is the past, present, future. You cannot change your past. no matter how much you may want to, and honestly focusing on a traumatic moment, focusing on something that's happened even just 5 minutes ago is just a lot of wasted energy because you can't change it.
Right.
And you cannot change your future. You can influence your future. You can do things in the present that will influence a direction for the future, but you cannot actually change the future either. The only place that we can actually make change, and the only way to do that is behaviorally, is in the present. And so that's one of the things that we focus a lot on is just being present.
And with that being present too, being present with your feelings.
Mm-hmm.
We as human beings, I don't think, do a great job at allowing ourselves to feel what we feel without some sort of justification or rationalization or, why we feel the way that we do. But feelings are neither right, wrong, good, or bad. And they require acknowledgement so that they can be used. If we repress them and we bottle them and we don't do that, then it typically causes more compounded problems in the future. So for us, navigating grief, it was very intentional, like, okay, naming and labeling, what do I feel? What do I know about that? What's real here? What do I have control over? And based on that, what do I want to do? Because with everything, there's two options, right? There's at least two options, if not more. Mm-hmm. And I know for us, we did not want to add insult to injury and have the loss of our daughters replicate into more chaos and grief and negativity, because that was counterintuitive to who they are. And so we've chose to live our life in a way, utilizing the skills that we've learned to honor them by living the best that we can and helping as many people as we can do the same.
I love that.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what our girls would want us to do. They would want us to go on. They would want us to enjoy life. And I for any of you listening out there that have lost a loved one or are going through something hard, no one wants your loved one that has gone wouldn't want you to basically kind of, for lack of a better way, putting this, throw your life away. They'd want you to go on. They'd want you to enjoy life and to spend every moment happy and filled with joy. And it is honestly a choice. It's a choice to either move forward and enjoy what you still have, or, there is also the other option where you can choose to focus on the past things that have happened and not move forward.
And I think it's important to highlight the fact that we are by no means saying don't feel those things and have those moments where you feel like you can't move on, because they happen. But it's a matter of how long do you choose to stay there before you start finding something else to do. And I remember a time when I literally negotiated with myself and set a timer. You're going to sit here and you can ugly cry and you can have the mascara and all the things curled up in a ball. You're going to give yourself a minute, but 20 minutes, you're going to move. You can do your thing, get it out, but 20 minutes, you're going to move.
Yeah.
Because is this really serving you at that point?
It reminds me a lot of the serenity prayer. I've always loved the serenity prayer of God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that's often, I feel like, where so many people struggle is knowing that difference of what do I really have control over versus what I don't. So everything you've said is just so powerful with that. And I'm curious too, because I've talked to people kind of on all sides of the spectrum in terms of when they have experienced grief and loss of especially those very close to them. I've had some who are like, I've not had any powerful spiritual experiences. Why hasn't this person come back to me and talked to me? And then I've had others who, have these very profound things where their loved one, they see them in, obviously a different capacity through spiritual eyes. Has there been anything, I'm sure obviously your spiritual beliefs and your core beliefs have played a huge role in everything you're going through. Has there been anything you feel like sharing in terms of spiritual experiences surrounding this?
Yeah, so, excuse me. One of the things that we've talked about many times is it is our faith. it's the skill sets that we've learned, and it's also our support system.
In that order.
In that order. Yep. Our faith, our skill sets, and then our support that we have here, with family, friends, and that's honestly the pillar of what we relied on to get through all of this. And yes, I actually this was probably about 2 months after the accident. I had a very special experience where kind of in this, I don't want to say dreamlike, because I was definitely not, it was like asleep but not asleep, very present where I was at, and it was almost like this in-between sleep and awake state. And I had Ellie actually come and visit me and shared a message with me that it was needed at that moment for me. I felt very guilty right after the accident because I wasn't up there with with Becky in the canyon. Felt like for the longest time that if I'd been there, I would have been that extra hand that could have boosted the girls up, could have got us out of there. And of course, when I start talking about the skill sets, I mean, there is no guarantee of what might have been different.
Right.
So to go down the rabbit hole of what if and what I shoulda, coulda is just, as we mentioned, wasted energy. But there was a point where I did feel guilty for not being there at least to help them. And then I asked myself, like, I was rushing off to quickly go get the things that we needed to come back to the canyon. Did I even say goodbye to my girls, and give them a hug before I left and rushed off? And so there was a bit of guilt that I was dealing with. And so I think that message, I needed that as kind of I know it's not the end. I know we'll see our girls again. And it was kind of a way of her saying, just for now, keep your chin up. You got this, and we'll be together again. It was a very special message that I needed. And I think it was very impactful coming from her. Because when I was out there looking for her, I remember that helpless feeling, probably much like Becky felt up the canyon. When situations are raging and you just have no control whatsoever of what's going on, you feel completely helpless. And so it was needed.
Yeah. I haven't had anything as pronounced as Tim. Mine is more impressions. Mm-hmm. I feel the presence. Mm-hmm. It's almost as if I hear their chatter, and almost as if their thoughts are impressed upon my mind in different places. The first time we went back to the canyon, that was an experience. It was almost like I was racing them up. I felt the joy and the childlike wonder of that experience. So you have been
back to the canyon. We were talking, I think, a little bit off air earlier. Mm-hmm. So within even a couple of months, then you went back to the canyon. Yeah,
it was less than 3 months. We went back to the canyon. I needed to see. I had this driving, burning desire to see where we were, mm-hmm. right? My mind was trying to still figure out all the reasons for things. And so, if I'm being honest, my intention was I wanted to go up and see where I screwed up. Mm-hmm. That was kind of, it was the driver. And one of the blessings that came out of that is, like, I had, again, tactically, going at a different day, a different time of day, so the lighting's different, so that my brain didn't get locked into reliving and could process it as a new event. So there's a lot of tactical stuff that went into it. And we had people drive us to the canyon because I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm probably going to just be a mess. I'm going to have to be carried out. So we prepped for all the things, and we got there, and I felt nothing but peace. Pain, yes, but peace, because the only things that we could find were the places where we found each other. Where Tim found me on the trail, where Tim found and got Ellie, when he got Kinsley. And so it was a very healing trip, but it was nothing like I expected it to be.
Yeah, we had kind of expected to fall apart and have to be, so to speak, carried out of the canyon. And
I was going to be catatonic. I was planning on it.
And so the fact that we went back there, and we've been back since, and just the peace that we feel in that canyon, it's become very sacred to us. And mention that our girls actually have a picnic table there at the trailhead now with the girls' plaque.
Yeah, we were able
That's
to
awesome.
to work with Bureau of Land Management and get a site improvement, and so they put a picnic table and some plaques there so that people have a place to prep and a little bit of a memorial for them.
I think
there.
our girls would be very happy to know that their name is on the canyon
Oh,
that they love
yes.
so much. It's one of the things that would just bring a big old smile to their face to know that their name's on it. So,
That's so awesome.
but yeah, it's become a very sacred place, and we go back. And honestly, that is one of the things that has helped us through this journey as well. Is those things that are uncomfortable, those things that are painful. Actually facing those things head on. That is part of the healing process. Is to be able to work through those. And, as we mentioned, with the present and then the past, when you actually go back in, like when we went back to the canyon, staying very present when we were there and not going, as Becky kind of mentioned, there's this whole thing about remembering versus reliving it. And so if you can actually go back to the place where that pain happened, or that trauma happened, and actually stay present in that moment when you go back, it becomes a healing experience. It's actually a opportunity to work through some of those painful moments in that present instead of reliving what once was. And that we have found is very helpful in moving forward, is to face those difficult places, those difficult moments. Holidays come up. Obviously, you have the first holidays after losing the girls. You have those important birthdays, and different dates come up. The 11th of the month was when it happened, and so you'd be surprised at how when the 11th rolls around, the
What is
emotions.
going on? And I'm like a mess. What is going on? Oh,
Yeah.
that might be part of it.
Today's the 11th. Oh, wow. But, when you actually just face those things head on,
Yeah.
those moments, those anniversaries, those kinds of things, and you stay very present with the moment and what you're actually feeling right then. Again, not to, bring judgment into it, because it's not about what's right, wrong, good, bad. You just simply identifying and naming and labeling what you're feeling, what's going on in the moment, and working forward it's healing. It really is.
Yeah, I think that's amazing advice. Is there anything maybe that hasn't been helpful? I think sometimes when, people are on the opposite side of where maybe they know someone who's going through something traumatic or is grieving, there's kind of that, ooh, do I talk about it? Do I say anything? Like, are there things that maybe you could recommend to people of, hey, maybe don't say this if someone just went through a traumatic event, or maybe do say this, or reach out, or what would be your advice as far as that goes with others trying to help people go through a grieving process?
Great question. So one of the things for us that we, like, especially early on, like questions like, can we do this for you? Or do you need this? Required too much brain power. Like, I don't know if I need that. I honestly just don't even know. But just reframing it to something like, we'd like to do this, this, and this for you. Would that be something you're open to? Allowed me to answer with yes or no, instead of feeling like I had to like plan and orchestrate like all these things or think beyond just the moment. That's something that is very helpful to consider, is how are you offering your services? Mm-hmm. And on the other side of that is, depending on how close you are to the person, like if you see a need, fill a need. Very rarely is somebody who's going through the loss of a loved one going to be upset that you took the initiative to cut their grass, to, go get groceries, to do something of service for them. Because right now their brain is literally flooded with emotion, and putting A plus B together is about the most that they can handle.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard it described once of, if you see someone drowning in a swimming pool, are you going to stand there and say, is there anything I can do for you? Can I help you? No, you're going to just jump in and take over and do what you can to help that person, right? Like, is that kind of been like what you would, it sounds kind of what you're describing is like, just do it. Don't.
Well, and it's kind of interesting that you described it that way, because honestly, what is actually going on inside our brains, in the 6 inches between our ears. If you take a look at information versus emotion, we have the emotional center of our brain. And then in the front, you have the prefrontal cortex. That is your information part of the brain. What happens when you're in that emotional state and you're going through something traumatic, PTSD, those fight or flight type situations kick in. The prefrontal, your information part of your brain, is actually flooded with blood. The blood flow actually all consumes from the emotional center. And that's how come they call it brain fog. They call it a brownout. I've heard many different terminologies for it. But it literally drowns out the information part of your brain. And so somebody who is going through, loss of a loved one, somebody who is, dealing with something very traumatic, going through grief, they're literally, in a sense, drowning in, in their own head. And that information is just not coming. And so, as Becky said, it's difficult to just do basic, simple things,
I thought I was a rock star when I ordered takeout.
Yeah.
I'm going to say.
She tells the story all the time of just being able to order takeout and what a win that was, because just the ability to actually do something for herself. So that just kind of back to, if you see a need, fill a need. Take that opportunity to take that load off of them, do something for them. They'll appreciate it.
And I would say, one of the things maybe to think about in response is things like, I get it. I know what you're going through. Although they may be accurate for you, it is not necessarily the same for the person who is in it in the moment. Mm-hmm. In time, they may be able to be like, okay, yeah, there's relatability there. But sometimes that's challenging because it's like, how? Right? How can you know what I'm going through?
Right.
Yours was different than mine, and that's where a whole bunch of judgment comes in. And so an offering there is, just to be, that maybe this must be really hard for you. What can I, from that perspective, try relatability, not from, I get it.
Right.
Because a lot of times that can be challenging for both parties.
Right.
Right. And the internal stories that are going on for both parties, both the person who wants to help and the person who's going through grief, don't often align. And so getting curious and asking, questions that are reasonable to find out what you actually understand about what they're going through.
I remember my sister-in-law describing that similarly after they lost their little baby. And similarly, she said, I would much rather have people ask me questions about how I'm feeling versus assume or try to relate to feeling the same way. And also being able to talk about, say her name, Alice, or, not feeling like you have to shy away from ever talking about the person who died. And maybe you feel similarly that it doesn't have to be something that's not talked about, but actually, talk about them.
And we do. Our girls are not something that we ignore. It wasn't like that was our life then and this is our life now, although in construct it is, but they are still part of us.
Yep.
We wouldn't be the people that we are today without them in our world and the impact that they made and continue to make. And so, if you're worried about, do I ask, do I talk about them or not? Ask, hey, are you open to that? It goes a long way just simply to ask permission of the people that you're working with to see what works for them and allowing them the grace to change their mind if they need to. That was another thing, social situations for us in the beginning. When you make an appointment, you show up, right? That's normal.
Right.
When people are going through grief and they're dealing with a lot, they may say yes to something and then be in a place where it's not effective for them. Mm-hmm. And so having support groups aware of that and making it okay for them, hey, we'd love to have you, but we understand if you can't. At least giving them some sort of easy decline so that they're not overloading themselves emotionally when they're already emotionally overwhelmed to perform for their peers or their social circles when really in the moment it's what they need to be able to heal.
Right. So are you guys actually coaching people through their grief and Because I'm just sitting here talking to you thinking like, man, will you just be my new therapist? Can I just bounce things off of you? And
Yeah, we are.
I just think that's really cool that now you've kind of transitioned into that's essentially what you're doing full time now then, right? Is
Yes.
helping others get through their grief. That's amazing.
Yeah, the business that we've, so as we mentioned, we were working with entrepreneurs to begin with, and then when the accident happened, we had a lot of people approach us saying, how are you guys doing this? How are you getting through this? And so we found that it just, our business kind of transitioned from one of helping entrepreneurs, which actually Becky still does to this day, but it shifted to actually helping people because we want to serve, we want to give back, we want to be able to help so many people that helped us. And so we have transitioned to, we're doing grief counseling now. We're speaking, and of course, Becky, wrote the book about what happened and our process working through that.
And where can people get that book from?
They can either go to swept-away-true-story.com, and then they'll be able to purchase it there, or you can go to our website, timandbeckygraff.com, and there's a link there as well.
And is that timandbeckygraff.com? Is that also if someone was interested in doing
In the
counseling
coaching.
coaching with you guys, that's
Yep.
where they would go as well?
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep.
I think we have a question over here. From
Yeah, so
Sean.
I'm usually the quiet, the quiet guy in the corner. But I had a question, and having known some people that have gone through traumatic events with their children or loss of children, you've spoken a lot about how other people can interact with you. My question was, how has your marriage survived? I know there's a lot of situations where children, traumatic events with children, which seems to be the stem of divorce. Along with all the trauma, you could then add on thoughts of blame and survivor's guilt and why couldn't I, or why shouldn't I, or why didn't they? How have you overcome that, or how are you overcoming that? Maybe might be the question.
So that one has been brought up quite a bit. That is one question that we get asked quite a bit is how are you guys still together? How are you working through this? I remember right after the accident, actually, after finding Ellie the next day and going and seeing Becky at the hospital, and one of the first things she asked me was, her concern was that
My biggest concern riding
I'll let her
in
speak to it.
riding in the ambulance to the hospital, because it was quite the drive, was Tim's going to hate me. How could he love me after I lost our daughters?
Yeah.
That was a huge deal for me, because I just lost my world. And I was like, I don't see how he could. I don't see how he could get past this.
And I think the thing for a lot of people, a lot of couples, accidents happen and they blame themselves, they blame each other. They go down the rabbit hole of what if I'd have done this, woulda, coulda, shoulda, which is all honestly just wasted energy. Because as we know, we can't, we do the best we can in those moments when accidents happen, when things happen. We never know when the worst is going to happen to us. And it's not like we meant for it to happen. And one of the things that I went through my mind after learning the skill sets that we did and going into the canyon that day is I never did look at Becky and want to blame her, or how come you didn't do this, or how come you didn't do that, or, and going back to the canyon, there was never those moments of, well, how come you didn't go there or there? Because one of the things that I am aware of is something we call self-situation other. The only thing we can control within that is ourself. We weren't with the other at that moment. We weren't in that situation in that moment. So for me to be, judgy and be like, how come you didn't do this? How come you didn't do that? How come, you were even there, or any of that? I wasn't there. I don't know what was going on in that moment. What was going through her mind, what the situation was, whether there was water in a particular spot that I'm sitting here assuming could have been an exit, or, all these different scenarios. I wasn't actually there for. So for me, just to go down that judgment rabbit hole and start that game really, it serves no one. And that was one of the things that I was aware of. And so, and I also know my wife and know that she would never do anything intentionally to harm our girls. And that's all that mattered, to me, is I knew it wasn't intentional. And so the thoughts of blame, thoughts of judgment, all those things never came in there.
And I think this goes back to just what we talked about kind of in the beginning is, what's the truth?
Mm-hmm.
What's the truth of the situation? What's the truth with that? And what do we want?
Yeah.
So have there been times where he and I have been at each other because we've both been emotionally loaded? Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And it's in those moments where we're like, okay, what's actually going on? I'm missing the girls. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling grief and sadness. I'm angry. And being able to communicate that with the other person, like, I'm feeling all these things. It's not directed at you. I apologize if you get some of the shrapnel of it right now, but that's what I'm dealing with. It allows us to communicate. So the reason we're still together, the reason that we're able to work through and have come out of this stronger, where others might have fallen apart, is because we're aware of where we operate in our sphere of influence and control.
Mm-hmm.
And we choose every single day to communicate with each other.
I lost half my family. The last thing I want to do is lose the rest of it and add more fuel to a fire that is already consumed so much, and a lot of that does come back to our faith as well, knowing that I will see my girls again, knowing that I will be with them again. Last thing they would want is for mom and dad to be at each other and mom and dad to split. And so, we work on it, and it's a choice. And it's a choice that when one or both are having a rough day, we communicate. And we stay very present with what we're feeling and what is going on in that moment. And we talk and we work through it. Another thing that to mention is women and men process differently. Everybody processes differently. But women are more verbal. Women will they want to talk. And they're not necessarily looking for resolution, so to speak, but they do feel better by talking through their feelings, by just having somebody to bounce ideas off, just to talk, just to vent. So women are more verbal processors. Men, on the other hand, are not. We tend to tinker. We like to go out in the garage and work on stuff or find a project. That is how we off-gas those emotions, is through doing something physically. And so I think a lot of times, parents, the women feels like he's ignoring her and
in
doesn't.
Relationships.
Yeah, in a
Well,
relationship.
I can speak an example. Not too long after the accident, I was having a really rough day, and Tim was out working on our side by side, and I really, really wanted to go talk to him. And I went out and like, hey, attempted a little bit, and he was just like head down doing what he's doing. I knew that his response to me was not an affront. It wasn't not like I wasn't important, that he didn't care about me or anything else. But that's the communication piece, like, hey, I just need to focus on this right now. So I knew that I needed to find another avenue to communicate. So if it wasn't with Tim, what part of my support group could I call or text to be able to verbalize? And understanding that men don't talk like we do helped me not feel like he was just ignoring me and that he didn't care and that my feelings were invalidated, because he was dealing with his own. So that ebb and flow is, great to bring up, that the awareness of how your significant other, men and women, may process is helpful in being able to navigate it. Because again, it is so volatile as far as like your emotions, when and how and where they hit, that fluid communication has been a huge help.
And for those guys, reaching out to that buddy that's out there that, you can go do something with. Because a lot of times men will bottle. A lot of times we just shove it down and we don't release it. And then a lot of times when it does come out, it comes out explosive a lot of times. And so, not always, but I mean, it happens more often than not with guys.
There's a danger of that.
Yeah. So having that buddy that can say, hey man, let's go out, let's go do something.
Right.
Go golfing or something, just to go do something externally that, will help you off gas.
Yeah. And I love so much that you've focused so much on living in the present, because I really do. I think that's such key to really in so many areas of life, is not getting stuck in the past and also not getting so caught up in the future or having anxiety about things that you have no control over. Any last maybe tips on how do we better with ourselves live in the present?
Well, better to live in the present is to identify some, some sort of way for you to acknowledge what is right now. I know for me, like emotions was a really challenging thing, and that's where I started with this was, how do I stay in the present? I need to be present with where I am, like what's going on around me, body sensations, and even just describing things that are around me, and then, what do I feel? And one practice to, kind of calibrate yourself and check into your size of now, because we have multiple sizes of now, and that's a whole other conversation we can get into, but to stay in the present moment is, what are the things that I can see, feel, hear, or touch right now? What do I know about them? What are true? What is outside myself? Because sometimes we think that we are being present, but we're still in our head. And so we're kind of in that past future loop is what we call, living in the past and projecting the future. But anchoring yourself into what's going on right now, like right now. Can you tap your fingers? Can you take a deep breath in and count to 4 and blow it out, box breathing, those kinds of things, and then describe the sensations that you're feeling can help anchor you in the exact moment that you're in and help bring you back down out of either reliving the past or projecting, that fear and anxiety from the future. So, okay, well, what's true for me right now? And then work from there.
A lot of times just standing up and walking into another room or stepping outside, because your mind takes in all the sights, all the sounds, smells, all of those kinds of things. And it's a state change. Mm-hmm. You start to notice different things outside of yourself. And if you actually take a moment and name and label those things, what am I smelling? What am I seeing? That can be just bringing you into that present moment. And when you start naming and labeling those things and start asking yourself questions, that opens up that information part of the brain again. It brings you out of the emotion and puts you back into that information center. And that is one of the quickest ways to get present, is just to physically do something and then naming and labeling it.
Yeah, no, I like that. That's great tips for sure. In terms of future, what does the future look like, do you think, for you guys?
More. No, the future looks like for us is touching as many lives as possible. The skills that we learned, for one thing, have radically shifted who we are and in the way in which we think. In fact, it was one of the things that when we learned it, we were actively teaching to our girls, because we wanted them to have the ability to navigate their life effectively in all areas. And so we want to help support people in learning those processes for themselves and helping them be able to live the life that they truly want. Because I think as human beings, we don't give ourselves nearly as much credit as we could for what we have capacity-wise, what's possible for us with what we've been given as human beings. And we just need to know how to tap into it so that we can live our best lives in that regard.
One thing that I want to speak to just real quick, if I may, is acceptance. Becky talks about acceptance in the book. It's a true story of grief and acceptance. Acceptance is a huge piece. It's one of the 5 stages of grief. And it's honestly the most important one. But a lot of people have a misconception around acceptance and what it actually is. A lot of people think that by accepting something, it means that they agree with it, or that by, they're okay with it, whatever the thing is. If I accept it, then I'm okay with it. But honestly, acceptance is simply what is. And that's it. It's just simply acknowledging what is real. It doesn't mean you have to like it. It doesn't mean you have to agree with it. It's just simply acknowledging what is. But acceptance is one thing that you have to reach in order to move forward.
And acceptance is also, one of the interesting things about it is, as Tim mentioned, it's one of the stages of grief. And so it's like, check, did it. Mm-hmm. But it's not that cut and dried. Acceptance is a continuum. It's something that you have to achieve and choose to accept over and over again in different situations and at different times. And as Tim mentioned, acceptance doesn't care about your feelings about the thing. It cares about the truth of the thing. And can you choose to accept the truth of what is?
So true.
And there's acceptance in everything that we do in life. Not just grief, not just, what we've been talking about here, but there is acceptance in everything.
Yeah.
But it's just, it's one of those things that is misunderstood as something that, I have to agree with it, or I'm okay with it, or whatever the case might be. It's just simply acknowledging what is.
Yeah. No, I love that. And even similarly to forgiveness, is I think people think with forgiveness, it somehow means that it makes it right or okay what happened. But no, it simply means that you are being set free from being bogged down by that, but doesn't make it right. So
Exactly. Yep.
Well, I have absolutely loved having you guys on. Sean, any other questions? Because that was a great question over there. Yeah, so remind everyone again where, if they want to keep up with what you're doing or maybe even get involved and contact you guys, remind me the website.
timandbeckygraff.com is the website. The book is swept.away.truestory.com. And then you can follow us on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram primarily.
Yep. Just under Tim and Becky Graff.
Awesome. Well, you guys are truly amazing. Sincerely, thank you for being willing to share, of course, everything you've been through these last 4 years, 5 years, and also channeling that in such a positive, impactful way. And I know even just those who are able to listen to this, it will be such a blessing for so many people. So thank you so much. And thank you all for listening. I will see you guys next week. Have a happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks for being a part of the Michelle Tanner Podcast. Please like, follow, subscribe, and share. And always remember to keep exposing truth.
But I won't back down. No, I won't back down.
This has been a production from a podcast studio.